Alright, let's talk about updating a blog post. But before that, make sure you add an IP address to your MongoDB so we can access the database. So I'm going to allow access from everywhere for 6 hours, and this will take a minute to actually work. So now it is active and we can get our posts. So I notice in our postcard components, we don't have a background, and I'm just going to add background white to the postcards so it's easier to see. All right, that was just a detour. Let's start by creating a page for our update post. So in the posts folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I would call this edit. And within that, I will have another folder, which is going to be a dynamic route. So we already learned how we can create dynamic routes by wrapping the folder name with brackets. So in the edit folder, I will have another folder that is called ID, and it is wrapped with brackets. Within that, I will have my page.jsx, and we want to export our React component. So I will call this edit, and we just want to return some markup. And if we go to /posts and /edit, and then some value, then we can see that text. And in here, we want to create our form. So in our component, let's add the parentheses, and let's start with the div with the class container, and also set the width to half. I would also have an h1 with the class title that says edit your post. And we already have a form. Remember, we created a blog form in the previous videos, so we just want to use it here. Now this blog form is expecting a handler, and we don't have a handler just now, so let's leave it empty. And if we go back to the website, we can see our update form, quite simple. So this is going to be a combination of creating a post and showing a post. First, we need to grab this particular post that we are trying to update from our database and populate these input fields, and then create an action server for it to submit the changes to our database. So since we don't have a link here yet, let's go to homepage and then show, and then click on one of these posts. So we have the ID up here, and we just want to change the URL here from show to edit. So we have the ID of our blog post, and we just want to query our database based on that. We already did this on the show page. So let's go there and let's copy this logic here. Then go back to our edit page and paste it here before the return statement. So we are using the await keyword here. So let's make our function async. We are using the get collection, so let's import that. Then we are using this object ID from MongoDB, so let's import that too. And of course, we need to accept the params in our component. So we are grabbing the ID from the URL parameters. We are getting the posts collection from the database, and we check if that ID is 24 characters, then we will query our database based on that ID. Otherwise, we will return null. So now let's just log that post into the console and see if we have the proper results. So back to the website, I'm going to open the console, and down here we have an object and we have the information about this post. So this is correct and it's working. And now we just want to feed that data into this input fields. So our form is coming from blog form component. So we need to open that document, and we need to make the default values of these input fields a conditional statement. Right now we are saying that the default value should be the state value. So whatever we have in the state, and at first that is going to be empty. But we want to say if we have a value using props, then use that. Otherwise use the state value. So in our blog form component, I'm going to accept another prop, which I would call it post. And then on the input field for the title first, I'm going to say grab the post if this exists using a question mark, and then title. So if this exists, use it as the default value. Otherwise, use the state. Using these two pipes, we are saying or this one. So if we are passing a prop post to our blog form component, then we can use the title value on that. Otherwise, we would use the state. If we go back to our website, nothing happens yet. But if we go to the edit component and then pass a prop post, which is going to be the post we get from the database, then we can see the value in our input field. Now, even though this is working, this will give us an error, and you can see it down here. So let's open the console And this is the complaint or the error we are getting. Only plain objects can be passed to the client components from server components. So we know our blog form is a client component, but our edit page is a server component, and we cannot pass down posts directly to that client component. So what we can do here is to convert this to a JSON and then back to an object. So that will solve our problem. So let's change this whole thing around, and we will use an if-else statement to make it more readable. So first I'm going to create my post variable up here using let so I can reassign it. Then I'm going to cut this database query statement and delete all of this. Let's add an if-else statement and check if the ID length is 24. We will query our database and we will assign that post to this statement. But now we want to add another step and set the post again to JSON parse and then again JSON stringify that post. So we are just grabbing that object and turning that into a JSON and then back to an object, and then we are feeding it to our client component. This will solve the problem that we had here. You can see we don't have any errors anymore. And since we are using an if-else statement, we don't need to do this here anymore. So let's remove this question mark and say, and post collection was true. So if both of these conditions were true, then we will query our database and then we will use that in our blog form component. Otherwise, we will set the post to null. Now down here, we don't want to just use the blog form and then feed this post if it is null. So we want to make this conditional again. So let's wrap this with curly brackets and say if post was true, use the blog form. Otherwise, maybe use a p tag and say failed to fetch the data, like this. So back to our website. If we have a proper ID, then it would work. But if I change this, we get that failed message. So let's put it back the way it was. There we go. We have our form with the title, and we just want to repeat the same process for the content. Back to the blog form, we have our default value for the title input field. And down here, we have the text area. Let's say if we had a post prop, then read the content property from that, otherwise read it from the state. So again, back to the website, we can see we have title and content. If we go to another post, maybe my new blog post, and just change the URL to edit, there we go, we have our edit form. Now all is left is to create a server action for this and submit the data to our database. So let's close our blog form component and then go to the actions folder and posts.js. So this is going to be very similar to the create post. We have to check first and then validate the form fields, return the errors if there is any, and then save the data in our database. But there are a few extra steps we need to take in terms of updating, and that is finding the post we want to update. So let's copy this create post function and then collapse it and then paste it underneath and start by changing the name to update post. So let's go through this and make a few changes. First, we want to check if the user is signed in. So we are using the getAuth user, and if that returns false, then we redirect to the home page. Then we validate our form fields. So this would stay the same, and we are using the same schema, so we don't need to repeat that. If there is any error, we will return back to the same page with the error messages and also keeping the title and the content in those input fields. And then we try to save the new information in our database. But for now, let's remove this part and we will rewrite that later. Also, let's change the comment to update the post in DB and then redirect to the dashboard. So first, let's use this update post function in our edit page. Down here, we have our blog form that is expecting a handler. So let's use curly brackets and say update post. Make sure you are importing that from the server actions document. Back to the website, so we don't have any errors, that's good. And we are not logged in. If I press submit, we are redirected to the home page. So we were not able to perform any actions. Let's go back there and then comment out this redirect statement. So we just want to see if the validations work. So let's remove the title and press submit. That works, and we get back our value from the database. But if we delete the content and add something to the title, so we have something new, and press submit, we get the error and the text is back, but we also lost that newly added data. So that's a mistake I made in our block form. For the default value, we don't want to say post title first. We want to say a state first. So let's just swap these statements here and say, if we have a title in the state, first use that one. But if we don't have that, grab it from the post if that exists. Also down here, for the content, we want to say a state first, then the post prop. All right, so back to the website now. Let's reload. Let's delete this content and add something new here and press submit. And now we are keeping that changes. So that was just a tiny bug. And now we can move on to actually updating the post. If I press submit with the right data, we are back to the dashboard, but we are not actually doing anything. So we have to add the logic. The first thing we need to do is to find out which post we are trying to update. And we know we have access to the URL parameters in our server component. The question is how to grab that in our server actions. And we can do that by sending the post ID to the handler function. So the data is coming from our block form component. And in here, we just want to create a new input field of type hidden. And the value of that should be the post ID. And we are already grabbing that as a prop. So inside this form, before the first div, I'm going to include an input of type hidden. So the users don't need to interact with this. Let's give this a name so we can grab it in our server action. I would call this post ID like this. Now we also want a default value for this. And its value, it's going to be this post dot underscore ID. Now in this one, we don't need to chain the toString method because when we are sending down this post to the component, we are parsing that into a JSON and then back to an object. So that ID is already a string, so we can just pass that as the default value for this input field, which we are calling it post ID. Now let's go back to our server action to the update post, and I'm just going to log form data.get post ID. So this is our hidden input field, right? Let's go back to the website and just press submit here and go back to the terminal. We have the post ID, and this ID is the same as what we have in the URL when we are on the edit page or update page. So we successfully grabbed the post ID that we are trying to edit. Let's actually save this into a variable so we can use it to update it in our database. Right here where we are creating title and content, let's also create post ID. We will set this to form data.get post ID, and we can remove this console.log. So now we have access to the post ID, we are validating the data, and after that, we want to find the post we want to update. Let's grab our posts collection again, and then find a particular post. So let's say await posts collection. And first, we want to find that post. You notice here we already have a find one and update, and we will use that when we actually want to update this post. But first, I want to check if this post belongs to the user who is trying to update it. So first, I want to use the find one method. We want to find that based on the ID. And again, this ID is a string that we are getting from the form. So we want to turn this back to an object ID from MongoDB. So we use the create from hex string, and then we can use the post ID, which we are getting it from the form. Then we want to check if the user owns this post. So let's add an if statement, and let's say user.user ID. So this is coming from our cookies, right? And we are grabbing it up here. And that user ID is going to be a string. And we want to compare this with this post user ID. So let's say if this is not the same as post.user ID and chain the toString method, because this is coming from our database and it's an object ID, but this one is a string. So if these two are not the same, let's return a redirect to the home page. And let's put this on one line since it is just one return statement. But if the authenticated user owns the post, then they can update that post. Of course, this is going to give us an error because we are not logged in. So let's bring this line back and log in before doing anything. So we have a post here that is Mike's post, and I'm going to log in with Mike. So I'm logged in. Let's open Mike's post, and go to the edit page. And if I press submit, we are redirected back to the dashboard. We didn't get any error because this is my post. But let's go to this first blog post that was created by another user and then go to the edit page and then press submit. We are back to the home page and not dashboard. So that means this line of code kicked in and it redirected us to the home page. So now let's actually update that particular post and then we will test it once again to see the proper results. Now, in order to update a resource in MongoDB, we can grab the collection. In this case, we want to update a post and then use find one and update method. So this will take two arguments. The first one is the filters or the criteria. Which post do we want to update? And our criteria is the ID, similar to what we did up here. Now down here, instead of using the post ID from our form, we can use this one, which is already a found post in our database. So we can say post underscore ID, and we don't need the toString method because this is already an object ID. So this is our filter or our criteria. The second argument here is going to be the updated document or the fields we want to update. So we can provide another object and then use one of those special MongoDB variables that is called $set. The value of this is going to be another object with the fields we want to update in our database for this particular post or resource. In this instance, we want to update the title and the content. Now, the value of these two properties are coming from our form after the validations. So we can use the validated fields and then data and then title, and the same thing for the content, validated fields, .data.content. All right, so let's test this out and then we will recap. Right now, I am logged in as Mike and this is my post. So let's see if I can update it. I'm going to open the edit page and I'm going to update the title. So I would say Mike's post updated, and I will remove most of this text from the content. So I will just have 2 lines. And let's press submit. We are back to the dashboard. So if we've done everything correctly, the post is updated. And there we have it. We have our updated post on the home page. We can go to the detailed page. We still see the same thing. And on the edit page, everything works properly. Now let me log out and log in with another user. So this is another user I have in my database. Let's log in and then go back to the home page and then to Mike's post. So this is a post that is not my post. First of all, I can go to that page and we will prevent this in a moment. But if I try to update this, so let's add something here, for example, and press submit, you notice we are back to the home page and nothing was updated. So back to the same page, we can still see the title and the content. If I try it again, of course, it's not going to happen. But if I try to update this one, which is my post, let's see if this works. So I'm just going to add from John. This is the user that I'm logged in with, and press submit. We are back to the dashboard. That is a sign of a successful form submission. And back to the home page, we can see the post was updated. Now, to prevent the access to this page, if the auth user is not the owner of this post, we can apply the similar logic as we did here in our page component. So let's go back to the page component. I'm going to add some comments as we go along. First, we want to grab the user from our cookies. So let's say user, and we will set this to await get auth user. So that will give us the user, and then we are grabbing the current post from our database, and then we check if the ID is 24 characters and the database connection is successful. Then we try to grab that post. Otherwise, we would just return null. So in this if statement or this if block, we want to check if this user owns this post. So let's do this here. I can add another if statement within this if block and say if user.userID was not the same as our post.userID. So if that is true, that means this user doesn't own this post. So we want to return a redirect that needs to be imported from Next navigation, and we will go to the home page. So let's see if that works. If I go to my own post and then the edit page, then we can access the page. But if I try to go to Mike's post, and then edit. We are back to the homepage. So let's just have a quick recap, and then we are done with this video. To update or edit a blog post, we create a dynamic route with the ID parameter for each blog post. Then in our page component, we grabbed that ID from the URL parameters. Then we also grabbed the authenticated user so we can check if that user owns the post. Then we checked if the ID in the parameter is 24 characters and the connection to the database is successful. Then we query our database, create an object ID from the ID in URL parameters, and then we turned that post object into a JSON and then back to an object again so that we can send that to our client component. We also checked if the authenticated user is the owner of that post. Then for our form, we created our server action that we called update post. In this function, again, we checked if the user is authenticated, and also we go through the validations for our form fields, and if that is successful, we try to find that post in our database based on the ID which we get from our form using a hidden input field. And then again, we check if the authenticated user owns the post that we just found and we are trying to update it. If that is true, we go ahead and update the post, and we find that particular post and just set the properties that needs changing. So we only change the title and the content, and at the end we redirect the user to their dashboard. So this is all we have to do to update a post, but keep in mind that our edit page will give us an error if there is no logged in user, because here we are grabbing the authenticated user and this will return null if no one is logged in, and then we will have an error. But we will fix that using a middleware, and since we are not there yet, that's okay to get an error. So if I log out and try to go to the edit page for one of these posts, you notice we are getting this error that is trying to read the user ID and is coming from this line of code. So in the future videos, we will fix this problem with middlewares. But that's it for this video. In the next video, we will create the user dashboard.